Hello, and thank you for joining us today on this conversation about how we use data and optimize processes in order to enhance your operation. I am Derek Miller, Regional Sales Manager, iWarehouse for the Raymond Corporation, and I'm joined with Jason Thompson, Director of Technology Solutions for Welsh Equipment. We're going to continue on with just talking about a few things in terms of how we recommend you think about an operation as you solve your problems. We always say the first thing you want to do is continue thinking about optimizing, connect, and automation. So a lot of times you go to trade shows or you see some cool technology out in the field and you kind of want to just jump right into it. The issue comes down to, are you ready for it? From a maturity curve perspective, has your facility optimized to the point of being able to accept that technology, right? Have you standardized? Have you optimize the processes that you have, and have you really used the data that exists in order to understand whether automation really works for you and your operation?
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great introduction, Derek. And this slide we're just throwing this in as an example right now. The slide on the left, this is a actual example of somebody's facility before they optimized without having the data shown here. They thought they were running a very lean, efficient operation. Once we were able to get some data flowing to them and some connected data technologies to them, we were able to come up with the path on the right for them. So on the left, pre-optimization. On the right, just an example of what we're able to do once we optimize a facility.
So again, we want to talk about, as Jason mentioned, using the data, right? So they use data to turn one spaghetti diagram into another spaghetti diagram, but the one on the right was much cleaner, right? So that helps you understand how do you optimize and really standardize as much as possible in order to analyze how to solve the underlying problem. So really you want to start with observation. And a lot of times that's visual, right? So if that's where you're at, that's okay. That is to you a data point. So a lot of times you could be talking about lean management. And really what lean management is that standardization process, really understanding what's going on. And then you can enhance into additional data sets, right? You can mature into, maybe you add some basic technology that would potentially help your operators, but gives you value of data in the background. You're going to continue with that journey by maybe adding operator assist technology, which again continues to help your operation. The operators on the floor are going to appreciate that, but really they've grown into it. The data becomes more rich, and it's really layered upon the data that you've already received to give you a total picture. Finally, you can start adding things like real-time location sensing or locationing, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But again, that becomes a very rich data set, and really you want to go through the process of interpreting the data that's available at a simplistic level and grow into what's available in the future. So again, here's the process that we would recommend, right? First things first, what are you having problems with operationally? You can lead with technology, but you're also then taking technology and trying to find an application for it. But is that the biggest problem you're having? So we might suggest taking a step back, getting key stakeholders involved, and really understanding what the problems are, and is there any interconnected relationship between those problems, or are they all standalone?
Sometimes, Derek, too, on finding the problem, intuitively, we think we know our operations, we think we've got an issue that we want to solve in there. And sometimes that's really not the problem that we want to solve. I had a customer come to us, they wanted to automate, they wanted to put in an AGV and autonomously move their product around. And as we got talking to them, we identified some gaps in their system, right? Knowledge about their system. And what ended up coming out of it wasn't an opportunity for an autonomous guided vehicle. It was really for a labor management system, right? So sometimes when we think we know what the problem is, as we go through that discovery period, something else comes up that says, no, this is what we actually have to solve first.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely correct, Jason. And in many cases, you say, okay, I've got a problem, but maybe that problem is for a process that costs you as an operation $250,000 a year. Maybe it costs you $2.5 million a year, right? So you really have to understand financial impact of that problem to your operation. And, perhaps a labor management system, as Jason just mentioned, may actually give you that insight into cost, right? Especially if you're looking at cost for your people. But then you have to weigh the cost of the potential solutions. And that's where, looking at it as an overarching system really can add a lot of value, right? Do you want to throw a $2 million solution at a $250,000 process? Yeah, you'll potentially see an ROI in a decade, but you really want to make sure that you understand total implications. Also, analyzing the costs allow you to figure out how to prioritize. So when you're back finding the problems, perhaps, that thing seems really important to all my management team or all my operators, and maybe that's what your priority is. But also maybe you have cost factors and what's the biggest impact to your bottom line in doing your prioritization.
Yeah, and that's the numbers you use there were an exact numbers of an example that I was just going to bring up out in the Denver area. I told somebody I could solve all their problems for $2 million. And then once they got back up from falling over, we decided something closer to 250,000 was more feasible, at least for now, right? Future state, we might go to that other more expensive one, but at least today we had a much more low cost option.
Excellent, Jason. It's nice to know that I'm not just making it up, right? So optimizing the next step with process and technology. The first couple screens we showed talked about that optimization process. So that spaghetti diagram that Jason spoke to, that is the step of optimizing. Now let's assume you are in that right screen, that optimized path. You've reduced your travel by almost 70%. What now? That's when you start evaluating, what is my next problem? And that's what we're going through now. Maybe my next problem is, highly repetitive process, right? How do I solve that? Maybe it's with an AGV, sure, but maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's through telematics and you're just looking at travel distance as compared to some other data to know, are the operators taking the most efficient path? Maybe we are looking at travel distance as compared to the type of equipment that's being used, right? So it's really identifying now with technology to start identifying that need, because you really can't do that first. You have to optimize first.
Yeah, I agree. And as we move over to analyzing the data, once we start getting this data, the only thing I'd recommend really is, data is agnostic, and we have to treat it that way as well. We have to be open to that data contradicting or being in conflict with what we think we know about our operation. I had a customer, one of your customers as well, that we showed them data on their rider jack usage, and I thought a fist fight was going to occur because we showed them this much utilization on the data, and they thought their operation was going, really, really fast and very optimized already. And so it took them a little bit to accept that the data was valid, that what their impression or thoughts were about their operation were off just a little bit. And to their credit, they got there, right? And then we were able to put in some other technologies that really helped them understand the disparity in their thinking and the reality of their operation.
Great, Jason. And I think the next step, and what may think and look like as the final step, is that idea of actually iteration. So if you look at the first bullet, again, it says find the problem. Now you probably don't have just one problem. This is the flow to solve and address that problem and get it to an optimized state with data. But that then comes to the iterate. I think this graphic actually should have an arrow returning to the front where you define the next problem. And that next problem may be on your initial list, or it may be a problem that you identified as you're going through this process and you added it to the list. You really just kind of go through this process systematically. If you try to chew 30 problems at once, you're going to find you don't have the resources, maybe not the money, and definitely not the time to properly execute, right? That's a lot of data, a lot of resources. So again, these can be one at a time, maybe you couple a few because they are interconnected, but ultimately you get through this phase and you analyze again, how did that impact your operation? And then when you're ready, start at the beginning and walk through it all the way through again.
Yep. Good. Good. Derek, let's look at some of these technologies that are available here.
Excellent. And if you've been to trade shows, seen videos on YouTube and LinkedIn, websites, you know there's a lot of new technology out there. And that often is what drives you to lead with a specific technology. So let's talk about them and kind of what the impacts are. So, what is locationing, for example? Locationing can be a couple of things. You could have a system that gets you down to the sub-foot level, or, plus or minus a foot or two. That is a different set of infrastructure. And maybe it's using specific, accurate RFID technology or ultra wideband. That's really going to dial it in. But what problem are you trying to solve by locationing, right? Are you needing to get to that level? Or is it maintenance you have 1 million square feet and maintenance just wants to know generally where that truck is so they don't have to hunt for it for 2 hours? Well, if that's the case, you don't need to be down to that 2-foot level, right? You could be using access points on your existing Wi-Fi network in order to understand generally where it is. And as even access points refine over time, that even too will get more and more granular. But let's say you're doing an analysis, a deep analysis on slotting, right? So what is your slotting? And again, you can see slotting is number 4, but it also ties back to the second bullet, right? How do you slot? Well, chances are, if you're using data and location data, you want to know where the congestion is, because it makes a ton of sense in my mind to put all my fast movers in the first 3 aisles, right? Travel distance is minimized. But if you got 12 trucks in those 3 aisles at any given time, maybe you need to expand it to aisles 4 and 5, spread it out a bit, just to make sure that every single truck that's in that aisle or every single picker that's in that aisle is moving efficiently. So understanding congestion. Another thing is, equipment behavior based on location. So let's say, for instance, you're looking saying, well, we've got a lot of reach activity in these aisles, but I'm seeing a lot of pallet jacks. What is going on there? And you may not know that if you don't have the data. So what are they leveraging? Have I assigned the wrong equipment? Do I have a slotting issue? Maybe I need to upgrade my WMS based on that data. And you could definitely see, do they have a deviation in their picking process and that they found is more efficient, which can feed right back into that flow we were just talking about. Then again, future iterations, location is just a part of what can ultimately get you to a more complete and more efficient system. And we'll talk about that a little in a few slides after this.
Yeah, I think too, Derek, on this one, there's a compliance piece with it as well. If you're operating in very narrow aisles and you have one-way traffic, how do you know, right? How do you enforce that your folks are doing one-way traffic? It's designed that way for a reason, and you can have great intentions, but if nobody's doing it and there's no checks on that, then how do you know?
Sure.
Right? That's actually working there.
Congestion, right? Congestion. You've got a mezzanine, you've got a swing reach. What do you do there, right? So getting you to the optimum correct pick location is driven by WMS. There's a lot of potential out there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
So Jason, I know you've got some experience with sensor hardware. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience?
This we see over and over again, and we're getting more and more calls about this, not only machine to machine collision avoidance, but machine to person collision avoidance as well. Folks are putting more and more things into their warehouses. They're getting more and more dense in there with equipment and with people, right? We're going to put as much stuff into our existing facility before we have to move, because moves are expensive, where these types of scenarios come up quite a bit. And the technology, especially with AI being introduced more and more into these types of systems, is really making it a lot smarter, so that I'm not just doing simple object detection, I'm actually doing people detection in a situation like this. There's also things that we could do with the new technology. You mentioned a swing reach and a mezzanine, where you can have that mezzanine detect that swing reach and sound alarms, right? So that we're not causing infrastructure damage. I think we've all walked through facilities where headers through doorways or through tunnel racks all have creases, dents in them, are bent because somebody went somewhere that they didn't have the clearance for. So the sensor hardware is really coming a long ways to help out with those types of situations.
And Jason, I think one of the big things too is it's not just sensing infrastructure. It's not just sensing truck to truck or truck to pedestrian interaction, but also it can be how does that operator interact with the equipment that they're operating on. So we're getting to the point where we're having a smart integrated tether, for instance, where now we can sense with data through sensors, is my operator even potentially clipped in properly? That data can communicate back through other systems and report out. So now you've got operators and supervisors who know how that operator is interacting with that piece of equipment and making sure that there are checks in place in order to make sure that we can alleviate risk from the very beginning.
Yeah, great point, Derek. Yep, again, helping with compliance, accountability. You've got a supervisor or manager that's responsible for ever larger groups of people, and they just can't be everywhere at every shift. And so the telemetry data, if you go with the telematic system, or what you're talking about, a safety system with operator restraints, those can really help with risk mitigation and again, that accountability piece. That's really at the heart of it. A lot of times what we get called in for, right? Somebody says they're really after something, but at the heart of it, it's just accountability and transparency.
Absolutely. So, advanced operational optimization. So we've talked about hardware, right? A lot of what we've talked about is hardware. We're going to solve it with sensors in the ceiling or tags and or sensors on the piece of equipment or something that the operator, the pedestrian is wearing, right? But there's also kind of non-tangible options out there as well. So, one of the biggest costs in the facility is your people, right? And a lot of times as you're picking up more volume, a lot of times it just means more bodies. And we know those bodies are sometimes hard to come by. So you also have a lot of turnover. So you've got new operators, seasoned operators. How do I know how they're doing, right? So, you can start looking through data mining off of maybe a lift truck or out of your WMS time clock, that you are optimizing your labor and comparing all the profile of what activity they've done to maybe a labor standard, or just looking at general utilization to make sure that, if they're working 8 hours, that you're getting the most utilization out of them on a value-added piece of property and a value-added process. In addition, if you know that operator is, paid $15 an hour or $50 an hour, now you can use that as a feedback against the volume and productivity that you're getting out of the systematic data to understand where your costs are in the operation. We talked earlier about having cost data. Great place to find this is in the non-tangible, say a labor management system, a WES, things like that allow you to really crunch the data and give you KPIs. That helps you prioritize. From there, it also helps you budget, right? Again, you want to throw your optimization process to the processes that are maybe struggling from a productivity perspective or just sheerly cost you the most. From there, that helps you understand, do I need an industrial engineer? Do I need a consultant? Do I need lean management to come in and help us observe and use data to optimize, change process? And maybe that's what ultimately drives you to a technology solution. And that even may be automation. And again, it's that constant iteration process we talked earlier.
Yeah, boy, when it comes to labor, when you start talking labor, this is really what keeps folks in the VP or C-suite level up at night, especially in such a tight labor market. I'm a big fan of coming in first with the labor management system to really understand what's going on with arguably my most expensive piece of my operation. So I think this is a huge one right here.
Absolutely.
Good. And then just a couple more slides left as we wrap this up. But this one here is talking in terms of thinking systematically or systemically about your operation, right? Holistically versus just introducing one-off technologies. I'll give you a great example of this. We were called in because somebody wanted to look at another autonomous guided vehicle, an AGV, to pick up pallets at the end of their ASRS system. Beautiful, huge, multi-million ASRS system, and they just wanted to continue that pallet of trying to move it as far as possible without having human interaction on it. And they did the ASRS first, and then they brought us in, and they just had they brought us in a little bit earlier when they were talking the ASRS, we could have helped them with the design because they didn't leave enough room. There wasn't enough clearance for that guided vehicle to go to pick up the pallets where they wanted it to. The doorways were tight. The process flow after that involved a lot of people, AGVs and people. It's not that they don't interact well. You just want to limit the interaction between them. And what we found was, one, there was a space constraint, and two, there was going to be, we weren't going to be able to deliver the tack times to them because that AGV was going to constantly be stopping due to foot traffic. So that's one where they just thought in one-off components. We really need an ASRS, and then this. Whereas if you can get your experts involved a little further upstream to think about the entire system rather than just bringing in individual components. And that's what we're trying to get home with this slide.
And then we talked about defining the problem, right, Jason? So what's leading in and what's going out? You said downstream, and that's exactly right. So, and you don't have to solve the lead in, the lead out at the same time, but that is part of defining your list of needs or opportunities, even if you don't bite off on every single one of them. You just want to make sure the consideration is there because, again, the interconnected nature of them, right?
Yeah, that's it exactly. And we've had we've identified something, a solution, which then causes us to have to look at something else. For example, if we want to move pallets a certain way, then we discover that pallets have to be a certain type of pallet. And now we've got to go up working with the customer back to where they're getting their product and having those folks use different pallets or band the product differently. So there is all of that interconnectedness. Very rarely are we able to just solve one issue without finding other issues in the operation.
I think the example, I'm sorry, Jason. So I think the example you described is, pre and post interacting with automation. And again, today, if you are just iterating one component of that, for a while, you are going to have, as Jason kind of indicated, that human to automation interaction. And, humans aren't perfect. So you really have to understand what the automation needs and how the human connects. So part of that system is the human as well.
Yep. Great stuff, Derek.
So, okay, so we just talked about the system. Why does that matter? Well, of course, you want the hardware and the automation to work together, but there's also synergy with the data, right? So let's say you decide, I want a very precise locationing data, right? Again, we talked earlier about congestion. We can see spaghetti diagrams. We can control a piece of equipment coming in or out of the aisle in terms of speed. That produces data. That data perhaps feeds into WMS. A lot of WMSs out there already, system directed put away, for instance, they're already looking to say who's closest to pick based on the type of equipment and the type of activity that person does. But feed that location data in, maybe it reroutes the operator or it switches the pick operation because actually it can calculate if they have to wait for that congestion, it actually isn't the closest pick by time. It might be by distance, but not by time, right? So data that can go in, you're talking about telematics data combined with labor management data. That gives you total picture and total cost to serve, right? The majority of your operations is hardware, your trucks, and the people operating them. So when you combine that data together, you do get that total cost of ownership, and you have a total picture of how to manage the people, train the people, certify the people on equipment that may need to be go through maintenance on a schedule. So I guess wrapping up here, I appreciate taking the time with Jason and I today, taking it back to the very beginning, right? So we talked about a lot and what a lot of times what the end state could be using various technologies. And we talked about how you need to have the vision of a system. But I think the underlying theme is you can't hit that system effectively, whether it be cost effectively or throughput effectively, if you haven't optimized the process. Automation loves a standard process. Now you can have multiple different routes. You can drive them in different ways by rule sets, but it likes to have a standard process to start with, or a list of them, right? So you automate that at the end. You optimize the process. Once you optimize, you grab that data and really analyze what happened when you optimize the process, maybe through visual observation. And then we start adding connected systems. Now you have a new data set, what happened there. And finally, after all the changes have impacted your cost, does the cost justify the automation? In many cases, it does. Some cases, it may not. Maybe based on labor, even though the cost doesn't make sense, you still have to run that automation because you can't find the labor, high turnover, whatever that might mean. So there are other factors driving the operation. But at the end of the day, we are looking forward to going through that journey with you and really understanding how to refine and how do you do that iteration. It's not just all your problems working through that system at once.
Yeah, good. Hey, Derek, folks want to find out more about this or find an expert to talk to, where can they go to?
So you can actually go to raymondcorp.com to find a kind of holistic list of, again, our products. If you notice, it's going to list products on one tab, but it's going to list problems on another. We also have a wide network of solution and support centers and a number of branches across North America, represented by hundreds of techs, all experienced on technology as well as equipment, and also a lot of specialists in technology and a lot of lean management folks as well. So reach out to whoever you'd like, and we can talk to you from everything from optimizing your service to getting to automation.
That's great. Good stuff.
So thanks for joining us. We're going to wrap up here. Appreciate your time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. You'll be able to find this video posted in the feed and LinkedIn, and also you'll find that on YouTube as well. So thank you for joining us, Jason. Thanks for joining me, and we look forward to you participating in the next LinkedIn Live.